Thank you. Good morning.
I would like to just thank you all for coming out on Saturday morning to hear all of us speak. It's been really enjoyable. Thank you again for Tiffany, Laura, and Ava for your wonderful presentations.
Likewise, I am also new to general semantics formally, but I'm familiar with some of the ideas, and so I'm really excited to share with you some of the research that I've been doing, some of the ideas I've been playing with. Apologies, I do not have slides, so you will have to look at me the whole time. So sorry for that. So I'm really excited to share this project with you. It means a lot to me personally. As I've talked with people about it, it seems to also resonate with them. This project has two parts. I'm sure in a month or so it'll have a third and a fourth a month after that, because really, what project is done? I wrote the first part a couple months ago, and I just feel like it was really calling me to take the next step. So bear with me as I test out some of these new ideas. So what this project is about, what we'll be discussing in the next few minutes, are the intersections between Postman, McLuhan, their work on education, specifically as it relates to online kind of asynchronous classroom. And how I got to begin this research, if I may start with a confession to you all, is I was really conflicted. I was reading Postman and his work on teaching and education, and was like, wow, this is really insightful, this is really engaging, and how he works with the intentionality behind your students and behind sometimes the time-consuming engagement that it takes to relate and have relationships and build relationships, how classes shouldn't really be transactional. They shouldn't be kind of set up and just let it run, especially with online. That is very easy to do it that way. But just this focus on intentionality and engagement with students. And coming into a semester, I already had a full plate and then was given 2 online courses to teach. And I thought, man, it would be so easy just to set up the discussion boards, set up the modules, set up the quizzes, and just kind of let it run itself, have everything be pre-graded, and just kind of take that kind of off my plate. But then I saw the stack of Postman books beside me and thought, all right, I'll do something about it. So that's kind of how this project got started. I then began to think about Postman and McLuhan and their language of environments, specifically the relationships, the structures, the medians of communication as they relate to educational environments. And it seemed very startling to me that perhaps it wasn't just my busy workload that was getting in the way of me engaging with my students, but perhaps there's something about the medium of this online course itself that is hindering the relationships that we can build between instructors and students. And so what I look at, I heavily rely on Postman and Weingartner's 1969 book, Teaching as a Subversive Activity. In it, they write, the basic function of all education, even in the most traditional sense, is to increase the survival prospects of the group. Well, this raises some questions for me. What's the current educational environment? Who is the survival group? And how are they, whomever they are, prospects increased in that context? So this essay seeks to address some of those questions. I explore the dynamics between Postman and McLuhan and online, and offer suggestions of how we might understand these components together. So first, understanding, according to Postman, of kind of what does it mean to be human. Postman writes in his book, The End of Education, we are the world makers, the word weavers. That is what makes us smart and dumb, moral and immoral, tolerant and intolerant. That is what makes us human. So for the purposes of this project, it is with this foundation of humans as meaning makers that I understand the relationship between online courses and students. So this term that I'm using is MOOC, which is really just fun to say, and the reason that I include it. But it stands for Massive Open Online Course. And this MOOC was officially developed in 2008 by Stephen Downes and George Simmons. And it's just grounded in this idea of distant yet cooperative learning, which that idea is not necessarily anything new. The printing press allowed books to be distributed, and we have distant learning that way. But this is on more of a technology, on computer, on online courses. And it was designed with this intention of how do we cooperate with students who might not be located within a university, but we can engage with and learn from outside. So massive open online course, massive in the nature of it can appeal to anybody. Open in the sense that students can enroll at virtually no monetary cost. Online deals with the mode of education, and course is termed to denote the affiliation with an accredited institution. So we have these two components, Postman's idea of what it means to be human as meaning makers and as it relates to the educational environment, and the educational environment of MOOCs. So in the next section of my essay, I take McLuhan and Postman's idea of the Faustian bargain that we play when we engage with certain media and certain technologies. So I look at what's kind of the Faustian bargain that we play in the sense of the aesthetics, the political, the economical, ethical, and social perspectives. And do not worry, I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm just going to give you an example of what that looks like for all those different items. So for example, aesthetically, the sequence within MOOCs is very modular. It's very linear. It's very, you do this, and then this, and then this. Everything is labeled for you. Everything has a name already. And this helps us as humans, as meaning makers. We like to give names to things. We like to understand what's expected of us. This kind of framework helps us to make meaning out of our circumstances. On the contrary, this kind of linearity and modularity creates borders, creates walls, does not allow students to further research, does not allow them to ask questions. And so that hinders what we understand if we understand humans as meaning makers. So this kind of, what does it add? What does it maybe take away? What are the advantages, disadvantages of MOOCs as it relates to some of these different aspects and what that implies for us as humans as meaning makers. So in the following section, I turn to Postman again and his work on the end or sort of the purpose of education. He writes, this educational philosophy addresses what learning is for, some transcendent political, spiritual, or social idea that must be advanced through education. He labels these as four gods that education sometimes serves. These gods are economic utility, consumership, technology, and multiculturalism. Now, Postman, and likewise myself, is careful to recognize that these gods are not inherently troublesome, they're not inherently bad, but once they become the ultimate goal of education, once education is for the sole purpose of these things, that's when we might want to raise our eyebrows and ask a couple questions. So I look at how might these different gods relate to MOOCs, relate to our online courses and our understanding of students as meaning makers. So again, I'm not going to go through all of the different ones, but just for an example, the God of economic utility. The idea behind this is its driving idea is that the purpose of schooling is to prepare children for competent entry into the economic life of a community. Children attend school to learn skills needed to be good employees, namely, sit still for 8 hours a day and do what you're told. Surely it's not unreasonable for school to have kind of a cultivation of skills to prepare you for a workplace. But the danger becomes when that is the sole purpose. One of the assumptions behind that is that the job that they're training you for pays well and can sustain you in the real world, and that job will be available in 4 years when you finish your degree. How this relates to our understanding of MOOCs is MOOCs often will kind of farm or harvest students' information and sell that to businesses and say, hey, businesses, here are students that might fit your job description. Please contact them however you would like. And so understanding this relationship, we see that perhaps there's a way that these ultimate ends or purposes might be hindering our understanding of students and professors as meaning makers. So in the same way, I look through these 3 different other purposes that Postman outlines. And say that the practices as exemplified in MOOCs perhaps do not uphold students as meaning makers. So in the final section of this essay, of part 1, I asked the question, now that we've studied MOOCs and we've studied this learning environment, what do we do with them? How do we engage with them? It doesn't seem practical nor an appropriate response to avoid online technology as a means of education completely. As Jennifer Spiegel writes in her dissertation on Postman, and education, schools would be doing a disservice to students if they didn't incorporate emerging technologies. As online education continues to be relevant in our culture, it would make us good stewards to understand how to use them well. At the outset of this essay, we established with Postman that a key characteristic of humanity is to be world makers, word weavers. We established that this key characteristic, in the most traditional sense for education, is to increase the survival prospects of the group. Then, how do we increase the survival prospects of humans as meaning makers in a MOOC environment? I end this essay with a call. Thus far, our analysis of the MOOCs via the lens of McLuhan and Postman doesn't seem to land us in an environment in which the chance of the survival prospects for meaning makers is increased. However, as Postman writes, if in short it's not doing what needs to be done, it can be changed, it must be changed. There's no reason to abandon hope. And perhaps this begins with our conversation, with recognizing some of the advantages and disadvantages, the Faustian bargain that we and our students pay to play in this MOOC online environment. Perhaps there are nuances in MOOCs that haven't been explored yet that provide really fertile ground for us to engage with and to understand and promote students as meaning makers. Or perhaps the MOOC structure should be completely destroyed and we start again with something new. A challenge that we face is taking the responsibility of change and placing it on our plate. It's a choice we can make. We can allow ourselves to be sacrificed to the gods of economic utility, consumership, technology, multiculturalism. We can allow ourselves to question how we use technology and how it uses us. And then we can allow ourselves to make meaning from whichever situation we choose. May we choose wisely, and ultimately, may we be the ones that choose. Part 2 of this project enters more deeply into this conversation of hope. I rely heavily on Jacques Ellul's work, Hope in the Time of Abandonment, where he explores the theme of abandonment in more of a modern technological society, where perhaps some of these traditional values, human education and spiritual meaning, seem to be eroding. He argues that in the face of such alienation, such disconnection, as I argue we experience in this MOOC online universe, hope remains not as an optimistic outlook based on circumstances, but as a deep existential force that transcends despair. Ellul contends that genuine hope is found precisely when we confront this void, when we recognize that many of the systems and structures around us no longer nurture our humanity. It is in this abandonment that hope emerges as a radical, defiant stance, allowing individuals to act meaningfully and faithfully, even when faced with overwhelming dehumanization. And then a quick look at part 3. I then propose practical ways that this deeply rooted hope might be implemented. For example, I suggest classroom activities that are designed for engagement between teacher and student that are inspired by Postman. And I do this as part of a larger project that's conducted by a fellow colleague, Joshua Clements, who's coordinating a project on what does it mean to walk Postman into the classroom. So in sum, this research emphasizes a deep existential hope that acts as a guide on this particular map of the intersections between the educational environment and human beings. Thank you.